Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Wendy Isett, and I am so excited to talk with you about your journey, Wendy. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, hi, Lori. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Let's start out with where I tend to start all of these conversations, and I'm just curious, what were the beliefs that were instilled in you as you were growing up that affected you down the road, or that you see a connection to?
I grew up like a lot of other Gen X women, in the 70s and 80s. Our parents had long, steady jobs. They were company men. My dad was a company man. He worked for the state, never left. Once he was in, retired with 25 years. My mom was this super kind, loving, open, friendly. All the neighborhood kids loved her. So really it was about kindness and loyalty. And so for me, that has really played into my life. I mean, I just left a job after almost 20 years, in one department. So, those were two biggies, I think, that a lot of us kind of grew up with.
So loyalty was instilled in you, that was a really important thing to have, and then that played out in you staying in a job for 20 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to stick around for that watch.
Right. When do you get that? Is that 25 or 50?
I don't know. I didn't get it.
Oh, okay. So then if that's the belief that was instilled in you, you stayed at this job for 20 years. At what point did you think, maybe this isn't where I should be, but I need to stay here anyway?
Well, I think, you cross over, I took the job because I wanted it. I had started with this organization fresh out of college, got a job offer for a newspaper, left and went and worked for a newspaper for a couple of years. And then they called me back and said, we have this position in a different department and we really would like for you to come back and take this job. Do you want it? And at the time it just fit. The commute was closer. We were growing our family. Everything just kind of fit. And so I went, and it was very exciting, lots of upward movement in the first, 10 years, what have you. And then I think once you sort of hit that benchmark, I see a lot of young people moving, 2 and 3 years at a job, and, they go and they spend another 2 or 3 years at a job, and then they hop to the next one. And for me, the job movement happened internally. So when I got to about the 10-year mark, it was like, well, I'm on track to be here forever.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I leave?
And then you were still happy.
Yeah, I was still happy.
Uh-huh.
And, and then you get comfortable.
Yes.
And then everything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're comfortable, it's familiar. You're used to a particular salary. You get into a rhythm. The people. The company. The products. Everything is just comfortable.
Yeah, which can lead to complacency.
Right. It can, and I don't think you realize how complacent you are. Until you're faced with either an opportunity or something happens and you have to make a change. It's not even your choice anymore. And then suddenly you realize, wow, maybe I was complacent. Maybe I was too comfortable, and suddenly you get this jolt of you get a jolt of inspiration, I'll call it,
Okay.
that you don't have to, you realize you were stuck and you didn't realize you were stuck at the time.
Yeah. So what was it that shook you into, I don't know if reality is the right word, but helped you realize that you were complacent, too comfortable? Like what
It was
what happened that
I
moved
lost.
you off of fine?
Well, off of fine, I think was actually being faced with the fact that I no longer had that comfortable job and that I had to get out of that comfort zone and move forward.
So for you, it was the job is you were. Remind me again what happened.
Oh, you're gonna cut this out, right?
Sure, I can.
Well, this I missed a media goal.
Oh, okay.
And
so,
was
so you were asked to leave.
yes.
Got it. Okay. And so that was kind of a reality check for you. Like, okay, now what am I going to do?
Yes, exactly. And it wasn't as much, it was a jolt because I wasn't expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
But when faced with it, I didn't feel like my life was going to end. I didn't feel like everything was over. I felt free because I felt like, I think when you get complacent, you sort of become the skyscraper with the scaffold that they're always fixing something and it's always being built and it's, you never actually see the building. But I was trying to describe it to my husband the day I lost my job when I said to him, I said, I feel like I've had this scaffolding around me for a really long time and now it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? The building is still standing up.
Yeah.
And now I can be who I want to be, do what I want to do, and go reinvent myself.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I was just, I don't know if I was scared to do it, if I was too comfortable to do it. I'm not sure what it was that held me back.
Right. Well, when we're in that comfortable place, there's no reason to do anything because nothing is urgent. Nothing is important enough to move forward. Because everything's fine.
Everything's fine. Exactly.
And then it's so interesting how the universe or your higher power or whatever you want to refer to it as is like, okay, well, now it's time to move. So they cause things to happen. That whether you're ready or not, that scaffolding, as you referred to, is coming down. And look, the building is beautiful and ready to stand on its own.
Exactly. And it's for me, I had a couple of signals over time. Things had happened where I sort of paused and said, maybe it's time to make a change. Nah, not now. I won't do it now. And then I felt like finally in October, the universe said, you know what? We're going to do this my way.
Yeah. You're not listening. You're not taking the hints. So now I'm going to really make it very clear
that it's time for you to go and fly, get out of the nest, stand on your own, whatever metaphor you want to use.
Right.
It's your time. So go do it. And it just so happened for me back in May, I had enrolled in a life coaching certification course because I wanted to leave the pandemic better than I went into it. Mm-hmm. I wanted to just do it for my own personal development at work, at home, with my scouts, whatever. I just wanted to be a better coach. And so as the course was winding down, that was sort of when everything happened for me. I was able to pause, put in the time, finish the course, get my certification. And that opened up some other doors for me. My mother passed away in January. If I had been a full-time employee for anyone but myself, I doubt I could have spent a month, dealing with that chapter of my life, the way I did. Yeah. So, I'm a big believer in the universe talking. So when it does, you should listen.
Yes. And right. And the lesson again is when you're not listening or you're listening, because you said you saw the signs, you just were like, yeah, I'm not paying attention to those. I'm not going to acknowledge. So you might even be paying attention, but you're just not willing to accept yet until it goes, okay, well, here, now we're going to make it super clear. Here's what's happening. And it works out, like you said, for the better, because it's arranging things that you can't see yet. And allowing you that time to have with your mother, that's really precious.
It is. It was, actually. Yeah. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And so since then, how have things been playing out in terms of the coaching, the knowledge of the coaching? How has that helped you through this time? Because I can imagine that even if you're not using the coaching as like, that's not necessarily what you're going to go into professionally. I know you're still kind of deciding on that. Mm-hmm. There are, I'm sure, elements of it that have helped you through this transition.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know that I could have made it through as smoothly as I have had I not been through the process of learning what I would share with clients or others that I was coaching. Just it's interesting when you go through and you learn about helping others reframe their circumstances, identify their goals, develop action plans. How happy are you in your life? What does your circle of satisfaction look like? And all of those things, to learn them, you have to do them.
Yes.
And so that was part of that realization that I was having in 2020. I was learning to coach myself. And the universe was starting to kind of drop those hints, of where I was happy and where I wasn't, and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and really what I wanted to have in my life. And I think as, we tend to just kind of put ourselves on the back burner, especially if we're, moms and workers, and we just stick ourselves on the back burner and we're fine, provided everyone else is fantastic. So when I got to that point, I already had these tools in my toolbox to really sit and say, okay, how am I going to manage through this? What am I going to do? What do I really need? What did my job give me on a day-to-day basis? And how do I continue to have those things, whether it's order or connections with people, or just, sharpening my axe, so to speak, how to, so I enrolled in some more classes, learned some more things, committed to going out there and finding those connections that I had put on the back burner a long time ago, and put a plan in place, to make sure that I was taking care of myself, both professionally and personally. While at the same time, emotions are very real. Yeah. And, you have to experience them. You can't bottle them up, because then you just become, this toxic bottle of emotion that's ready to blow at any point in time. You have to kind of let them flow over you and deal with them constructively. And so I think that's really been just a really critical part of my process of working through the losses. I've been joking and I said, my life's like a country music song. And if you play it backwards, I get my mom back, I get my cat back, I get my job back. And so it's all real, and you just have to cope with it in a positive way.
Yeah, and we talk about this in a lot of the episodes about feeling the feelings, because this is part of being human. It's not about always finding the positive, and I want to get to that in a second, but it's also about feeling the emotions and dealing with the humanness of life. And right, like you said, not bottling it up, because that never ends well. So and I want to step back for a moment, because you touched on something else that's really important. And that was when you looked at your job, of what were you getting from it? So in any situation, when one of our listeners is thinking about their situation is fine, there's a reason you're not moving off of fine, because the fire isn't hot enough, or it's, like we've said, it's comfortable, but you are getting something out of that situation. That's why you're still there. So it's important to look at, what are you getting from this situation that is benefiting you? Because there are still benefits coming from it. So I thought that was an important thing that you mentioned, that you looked at. What was I getting from this job that was good, that was fueling you? Because it wasn't all bad. It was fine. So analyzing what were the good pieces, and what would you change now that you're being forced to change and you have the choice? What would you do differently? But also looking at, what were the good things from it?
Well, for me, I love to learn. I'm a learn it all.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a know it all. I'm a learn it all.
I love it.
So I love the chance to get out there and learn something new, and to just really break something apart and figure out how it works, and go out and communicate that with other people. You get to a point after 20 years where there's not a lot left of that. Which is not to say that, there weren't new tricks to learn or new systems to learn. But when it came to, just the subject matter, that had wound down a little bit, particularly during the pandemic, because, it was a lot of the same. And so there was that. But I could always find something to go sink my teeth into. It's the people.
Yeah.
I really, had a great team we worked with, lots of longtime friendships, people that I've known now for a really long time, and I miss them. But we weren't really, there wasn't a whole lot of them during the pandemic either.
Yeah.
So that had kind of already, once you strip away the trappings of the office and the people and the, the commute and all of those things, and you're just left with the work. I think that's telling. And I still found it engaging. I don't want to give the wrong impression here. But as far as, what really intrigues me about doing something new is getting out there and digging into new subject matter.
Right. Challenging yourself in a different way. And now let's go back, because in our pre-show interview chat, you had mentioned, and you started to get into it before I interrupted, about the ability to choose how you feel.
Yeah, that's really important. And that's something that I've worked on for years. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I think anybody, even if you didn't know me, I'm a pretty easy read when you meet me. I'm a very open person. I'm a communicator. So, I don't play a lot of cards against my chest. My hand is pretty open. But I think really it is about choosing how you feel, particularly when you're just fine, or the fire gets hot enough that you have to make a decision that you may or may not be comfortable with. And being able to control your response is really very critical. And I've had to learn it. I had to teach it to myself over the past couple years, just because I've had to do it. And it's, for me, like you and I think in our interview at the front end of this, we had talked about my mother, and we talked about grief and loss and the feelings that come with grief and loss. And I think understanding, what it is you want in the moment. Do you want to be sad? Maybe you want to be sad.
Nothing wrong with that.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe this is a self-care day. Maybe this is the day to go have your pity party, if it's appropriate to do it.
Yeah.
But what happens when it's not appropriate to do it? When the grief comes out of nowhere and you're in a situation where you cannot, under any circumstance, lose it. How do you control it? And we'll just use my mother as an example, because that's obvious, and I think that's one that a lot of people can relate to. Is I spin it. I set out early on to decide how I was going to stop myself from being sad when I wasn't in a situation where I could entertain it. Because you have to entertain it at some point. And one of the things that I tend to do, and I had to think through this ahead of time, like you really do have to be very self-aware and think about your emotions, what triggers them, and how you respond to them. I was actually thinking about her just earlier today, right before our interview, and I have to think of something fun. My mother loved all of the silly little like snacks, the Twinkies with the little marshmallow Peep bunnies, and they're the Twinkie race cars with the marshmallow bunnies, and she would always share those kinds of things with me on social media. So when I start to feel sad thinking about my mom, all I have to do is envision this little Twinkie race car with the marshmallow Peep bunny.
Okay.
And it makes me smile.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it right now. It's good. Yeah.
You know which one I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen pictures.
It makes me smile because she got such a kick out of those little treats.
Yeah.
Or like the marshmallow spiders, and she had them for every season. I think she just kept a whole album of images on her phone, and she would just send them to me periodically. But I have to have that in my head to redirect myself and kind of park the sadness in its own little spot until I can deal with it later when it's more appropriate.
Yeah, that's such a good example of like redirecting your thoughts, because in business, you have to think about all of the situations where certainly not focus on things that could go wrong, but think about what if this happens? What if that happens? And what would you do in all of those situations so that you are prepared? Athletes do it. All the high performing business leaders, athletes, people who are performing at a high level, think about all the scenarios that could happen and what would they do if they did happen, so that they can be prepared. They're not putting it out there that they want this to happen. They're just saying it's a possibility, so I'm going to be prepared so that I have it already thought out, so I'm not caught off guard. And that's like what you're doing. It makes sense to take that. I think a lot of people don't necessarily think that way. They might think that way in business, but they don't think that way in their personal life, to use it the same way you've talked about. That's really interesting. One of the other things that we talked about was looking at those situations of, so looking at this, the what if this happens, I'm just looking back at our notes. We were talking about, it goes back to understanding what you need, knowing what you need, and what can you do to get it.
Yep. I think it really goes back to, I think with any kind of conflict, inner or outer conflict, we teach this to scout leaders all the time. It goes back to a very critical question, which is, what do you want? Mm-hmm. What do you want? And from there, you kind of ask yourself, okay, what are you doing to get it?
Yes.
How's that working for you?
Love that question.
And do you want to find another way? So for, my coaching clients that are dealing with, a loss or grieving through a loss, I always ask them, what do you want? Because if they don't want to move forward, they're not going to move forward. But if they want to move forward and what they're doing isn't working, then we can move forward together and help them identify a path. And that applies in business. It applies in personal lives. it's got all kinds of applications, really, young and old.
Yeah.
I use it all the time. But that first question is really, what do you want? Whether it's asking yourself, or asking another person.
Yeah. In a relationship. Yeah. Getting that clarity. There's nothing that can come from lack of clarity. Clarity has to be the first place that the foundation for moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, people don't even know what it is they want.
Right.
I love to tell this story. I'll tell you this really quick story. I was mentoring a youth years ago, and he, gosh, if he ever hears this, he'll kill me. He'll know it's him, but I won't give his name. He would go on weekend outings with us, with the Scouts, and by Saturday night, he was crying to go home. Every time. Mm-hmm. Every time. And this went on for a long time. And finally, I happened to be there one of these weekends. We were camping, and I had wandered down, and there he was. He was upset. He wanted to go home, just like clockwork. And I said, mm-hmm. Well, let me give it a shot. And so I used those 4 questions, and I went over and I said, what do you want? Mm-hmm. I want to go home. We went through the questions, 5 or 6 times. And finally I said, okay, I'm going to ask you one more time. Because his parents couldn't come and get him. That was the glitch that weekend, is they couldn't come and rescue him. He had to suck it up, and we had to make him suck it up. And so I said, okay, I'm going to ask you one more time. What do you want? And he took a real deep breath, and he said, I don't want to go home. And he startled himself out of his emotional state.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to go home. Okay. So what are you doing about that? Because you're sitting here crying.
Yeah.
And that's not making tomorrow come any faster.
Right.
It's not working out for you. Do you want to find another way? And we figured out another way. And you know what? He never looked back after that, ever.
Yes.
I even told that story at his Eagle Court of Honor. But, he just was off and running, and it was wonderful. But I think for us, when we say we're fine, maybe we don't want to be fine. Maybe we want to break out of the fine because we want to be fantastic.
Right. We just don't know what questions to ask, or we're afraid of the answers. There are a couple of different ways to go there, but yeah. But I love that story, as that's such a great way to end this episode, because it really makes you think, okay, it's not necessarily that he wanted to go home. He wanted to not feel like he wanted to go home. And that's something to really pay attention to, because it's not necessarily that we don't want the thing. We want to not feel like that we want that thing, or that we don't want that thing.
Right.
We want to get rid of that feeling, not the actual outcome.
Right.
Yeah. So good. All right. The question that I ask all of my guests before we leave: what is your hype song, that song that you listen to when you need to get pumped up and encourage yourself?
It changes by the day, but right now it's Brave by Sarah Bareilles.
Oh, yes. Such a good song.
I picked up on that week after I lost my job, and it just resonated. I downloaded it right away, and I said, why have I not heard this song before now?
Because were not ready to hear it. And
I was
then
not ready to hear it.
Then it was the perfect time, and it showed up for you.
Thank you, universe.
Thank you. Yes, we will put a link to that song in the show notes. Wendy, thank you so much for being with us. How can people reach out and get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation with you?
Sure. My website is www.patapscocoaching.com.
Okay, fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a 4-letter word.
All right. Thanks, Lori.